I'm glad to be here. I grew up in India, but now live in the United States. I'm a physician by profession, and this is one of my passions that I do, go around presenting this seminar. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Allahu Akbar. That is the Muslim cleric, the mullah or the imam. He wants to call the faithful. Allah is the proper name of God in Arabic. Ho Akbar is great. Allah is great. What he really means to say is Allah is greater than any other. And with these words, he calls the faithful to salat, prayer, one of the 5 fundamental pillars of the Islamic faith. Shema Israel. Shema Israel intones a Jewish rabbi. He's got a kippur on his head and a talik, or the sacred shawl, around his shoulders, because now he is in the presence of the law and the prophets, the Torah. These are the words that Jehovah God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. Shema Israel. Adonai Elohinu, Adonai Accord. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is one. Namo Amitabha. Namo Amitabha. That is the Japanese Tibetan. His Tibetan Japanese Buddhist, his Tibetan counterpart would say, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. That is transliterated to, oh, the jewel in the lotus. It is one of the most sacred chants of the Buddhists. Namo Amitabha. Namo means name. Amitabha is the name of a bodhisattva. Who is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is somebody who has reached the penultimate state of attainment in the Buddhist faith. The next stage would be a Buddha. But he refrains from being a Buddha yet because he wants to help human beings. And so at that stage, he presides over a paradise, and Amitabha presides over what is known as the Pure Land Paradise. There is no other name under heaven. That is the Christian bishop or the Christian preacher. No other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. And the name he refers to is Yeshua, Jesus, the Christ. The Christ meaning the Messiah, the Anointed One. The other names that he had were Emmanuel, God with us. Yeshua bin Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, deep in the Indian peninsula from where I come. Shaved head like mine, robed, bare feet. As they near the object of their pilgrimage, they break into a chant. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare is obeisance. Rama is the 7th incarnate of the god Vishnu. The triune gods of the Hindus, Brahma the creator, Shiva the destroyer, and Vishnu the preserver. And Rama is the 7th incarnate of the god Vishnu. Krishna is the 8th incarnate of the god Vishnu, who come down once in an age to help us human beings. Diverse, interesting, this religious world. But on the other side of the fence stands the person who does not believe in any of these. He is the atheist. And he looks upon these people who have all these chants and all these prayers and all these claims, and he says, oh, poor deluded souls, sipping at the Marxist opium of the masses, because that is what Karl Marx called religion, opium of the masses. You guys don't know how to face the reality of life, and so you go nibbling on some promises of some utopia out there, up in the clouds. There is no such thing. There is no God, there is no heaven, there is no afterlife, nothing. You do not know how to face the reality of life. So when I was faced with this during my search, I asked myself, well, if that is the case, what is this thing called reality? What do they mean by reality? Here's Bertrand Russell, who in the previous generation was a very vocal, brilliant philosopher from England. And when they asked him about his stance, this is what he said. It is only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair that the soul's habitation can henceforth be safely built. I read it over and over again. There seemed to be a severe clash of ideas. How could despair form a foundation? And how can unyielding despair ever be safe? It was Quentin Smith, who co-author of Theism, Atheism, and the Big Bang Cosmology, who was even more blunt than this. This is what he said. The only reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. My first inclination to that statement was, what is it based on? Why such a wide sweeping statement describing the entire existence of the human race? From nothing, by nothing, for nothing. What was it based on? And I came to a very simple conclusion. It is based on nothing, except a very private and a personal opinion, just like yours and mine. But nothingness is not an easy principle to live by. It is a very hard, exacting principle. And that is why we hear the words of Jean-Paul Sartre. He was a French philosopher, also believed in the same thing. But he decided to describe the reasons why he was an atheist. And after he had set his philosophy step by step, logic by logic, and put it out there, he said, look, I have shown you why atheism is the way to go. That's the only reasonable way to live. And then when he had said it all, he said, one question remains. Why I have not committed suicide yet. Sometimes we smile, but he was not smiling when he wrote those words. They are real. The nothingness of Quentin Smith will pull you to the unyielding despair of Bertrand Russell and drag you to the precipice of Jean-Paul Sartre. But just because somebody was despairing and wanted to yield his life and wanted to commit suicide did not make him or her wrong. Why? Because I knew many people who swore by God or by their religious beliefs. When life became oppressive, they also wanted to commit suicide. Have you seen many of them? Heard of them? Yes, of course. So just because somebody said there is no God and wanted to commit suicide didn't make him wrong. Just because somebody said there is a God and wanted to commit suicide didn't make him or her wrong either. I was still faced with the question, is there or is there not a God in existence? Is there or is there not anything supernatural beyond what we can see, feel, and think? That was the basic question. To that question, there are only two answers. There is a God in existence. There is no God in existence. Many people say, I don't know. That is not an answer. That is a response. And a response probably based on maybe ignorance, or maybe a claim that there just is not sufficient evidence and information to make a decision. But it is not an answer. To the question, is there a God in existence, there are only two answers. One, there is no God, he is fictitious. There is a God, he is factual. I had to address that right at a critical part of my search. Because if that was settled in the way that there was no God in existence, there was no need for me to worry about any of the religions on earth. What use looking for a named river or a lake if the existence of water itself was in question. But before we go to that question, I believe we have to, like I had to make a preparation. And the preparation was twofold. I had to ask what my own mental attitude was, and then I had to create an atmosphere. Now, why these things? Number one, I had to check my own mental attitude, because all of us, me, you, everyone, has within our minds, blended in there, at least three distinct attitudes. One is the attitude of a believer, two, an attitude of a skeptic, and three, the attitude of an inquirer. And many times we do not know which is the attitude we are bringing to the table at which particular point of time. What are these attitudes? And I am not describing any people. I am describing an attitude that all of us have. The attitude of a skeptic, believer, and inquirer. Let's look at some of the statements that could possibly give us an idea of what I mean by this. A skeptic will dismiss the report prior to thorough investigation. A believer will accept a report prior to thorough investigation, whereas an inquirer will hold verdict till the investigation is done. A skeptic will focus on the question to the exclusion of the evidence. A believer will focus on the evidence to the exclusion of the questions. An inquirer will focus on the weight of evidence. A skeptic will disbelieve in the face of reasonable evidence. A believer will believe in the face of big questions. An inquirer will accept reasonable evidence even if some questions remain, because questions will always remain. There is nobody on earth who can ever stand up and say, I've got it all. Nobody. Our minds are just too small to make such a wide sweeping statement and a claim. So questions will remain. But we were looking for evidence that will sway the pendulum to the side that is most reasonable. That's an inquirer. So, for the few hours that we are going to spend together tonight and tomorrow and the next 2 days, 3 days actually, what attitude shall we bring to this search? The attitude of an inquirer. Remember, it is very difficult to really grasp which attitude you are bringing at any particular time. So we need to remind ourselves often, and I would like you to do that. Often remind yourself, you are not a skeptic, you are not a believer at this point. You are an inquirer. Number 2 of these preparation. How many attempts do you think to gain the top of Mount Everest were successful? 100%? No. 0%? No. Some of them did reach the top. Many of them were stalled halfway or 3/4 of the way, especially as they got to the top, because the atmospheric conditions blocked them. Too much ice, too much snow, too much wind, too deep temperatures, not enough oxygen. And this huge, big expedition had to stop, turn your foot backwards and go back. All that expensive preparation gone. Because the atmospheric conditions were just insurmountable. Fortunately for us, we can create an atmosphere. And I believe there are 4 things we need to create that atmosphere. Number 1, humility. Number 2, honesty. Number 3, calmness. And number 4, respect. All 4 are important. If you miss out on any one of them, it'll become a roadblock. What do I mean by these 4? Number 1, humility. It is paramount. If ever you puff up your chest and say, I know, then you will not know the next thing. The first ingredient of any search, and if you want to join me in that, is to be humble. What do you mean by humble? It's the smallness you feel when standing before the vastness, grandeur, and majesty of truth. We are not even describing what truth, but everybody knows that truth with a capital T is really awesome and great out there. And if you have to stand in front of truth, then you are so small. You are not big. So let's square our shoulders and lift our chins up and say we know it all. Humility is the number one ingredient. Sometimes we do feel humility also when we look at others around us who have a wealth of knowledge. We should become humble. Then our mind is mellowed enough so that when information comes, we are able to accept it as an inquirer. Number two is honesty. You know, in my 20 years of search, when I was going through this period, talked to a lot of people. Honesty is a scarce commodity, especially when it comes to religious views. Oh, the way they will say it. Do you know this? Of course. What does it say? Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. And in a little while, the words are not all that confident. And then when the evening comes along, when nobody else is listening, if you sit down quietly and say, hey, do you really know? And then they will say, actually, I don't. Then why did you start off so big? Honesty is a scarce commodity. It is widespread. And don't think only they are dishonest. All of us are. I was also when I started out. And I said, hey, that's the way I made all the claims. And so because it's so widespread, so deeply embedded in us, I had to give it a definition, my own definition, and I had to apply that definition rigorously. And here's the definition of honesty. The willingness to give credit to a point or an argument, no matter who brings it up, even if that acknowledgement might destroy my previous standing. Are you ready to be honest? Yeah. I call it the wow factor. We should be ready to say, wow, if something is impressive. And not first think, shall I say wow or not? Because if I do, then it will destroy what I was holding on to all this while. No. Honesty requires that if there is a piece of information that comes at you, sweeping, strong, and big, then we stand there and say, wow. No matter who gets the credit. Are you with me? Okay. No matter who gets the credit. Wow factor. There will be some wows because, during a search of this extended period, there are many things that I came across that I had to just stand and say, wow. Because I didn't know it was there all along. So when I do it, go ahead and say, wow. Go ahead and say, yeah, pretty good. Or if it's not all that impressive, say, I don't think so. Or if you disagree, no, not with me. Anything as long as you have a response, then you and I are on the same page as inquirers. We are allowed to disagree, but be honest in your disagreement. The third one is calmness. Way back in 1879, Thomas Alva Edison, anybody familiar with that name? He invented the electric bulb. Do you know how many experiments he tried before he got that bulb to burn and brightly? Over 1,028 experiments. One of the problems that he had was trying to balance heat and light in that delicate filament inside the bulb. It would burn, and as it glowed, it would get too hot, and the contact points would break. Or it wouldn't even glow at all. That was his challenge. How would he balance heat and light inside that filament? Do you know religious discussions are exactly the same? It can get so dull and boring that the speaker himself is falling half asleep on his own sentences. Or it can get so bitter and vitriolic, you pull your shoulders this way, I won't talk with you again. Not only I won't talk with you, I'll pull out my guns and my bombs and my rockets. Right? Just go to the Middle East today. It's there. The reason is religious ideas somehow embed themselves pretty deep into our emotions and our hearts. And we do not like it being tugged at all. It hurts. And so you respond and react. And it causes a great deal of emotions. And so we need calmness. The willingness to keep my volatile emotions in check, because I have chosen to be humble and honest. In my humility, I acknowledge I don't know enough. And in my honesty, I state that. And when I say that I don't know, but I'd like to know, then I can remain calm. I don't have to fight for my own views at all. I will just remain calm enough to accept it. Because if we are not calm, then reason and judgment will fly out the window with your emotions. They'll be pushed out. And once reason and judgment are gone, your conclusions will be anything but fair and just. We've got 3. Humility, humbleness, honesty, and you're going to remain calm. Why do we want to remain calm? Like I said, the emotional content of religious ideas run very deep. And our natural inclination is to fight for what we believe. It is natural and it's okay, but not during a search. Not when you are an inquirer. Number 4, respect. Respect is used many times to denote agreement. But respect is not agreement. In fact, respect shines out even brighter when there is disagreement. And you still respect the person. Respect also sometimes is synonymous with admiration. But respect is not necessarily admiration. So it's neither agreement by itself nor admiration. It is simply this, allowing for the other whatever rights we feel is our due. I want to do a search in a certain way, and I should allow anybody else to do a search in their own way. And I would expect, in return, that you give me the same respect. Respect will never allow us to look down our noses at so-and-so and call them insulting names and hurl some insinuation, slip in some damaging insinuations just to knock them off. Or be condescendingly pitiful. No. Respect will allow them the same rights that you wanted for yourself. So these 4, humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. If we have all these 4, I believe we have paved our road with an atmosphere that will take us the distance. But how shall we apply it practically to our meeting and our search? I see you are quite comfortably seated, so I will not ask you to stand up. Usually in the seminars that I present, I ask them, the attendees, to stand up and take some deep breaths. So while you're seated itself, let's take some deep breaths. We need some oxygen going up to our brains. It's the 2-2-4 principle. Take a breath for 2 counts, hold it for 2 counts, and then let it go for 4 counts. Ready? Take a deep breath. 1, 2, hold it. 1, 2, let go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once again. Take a deep breath. 1, 2, hold. 1, 2, let go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now just pretend you're standing, because that's the ritual that I usually take you through. I'm not going to ask you to stand, so you're okay. But the reason I ask them to stand and take a deep breath is because now we're going to do another little ritual to help us with these 4. And the ritual is this. Draw an imaginary circle around your feet. Done? All right, simple. And now just take your feet out of that circle. All right, now let's ask ourselves what the circle was. The circle is all the philosophies, doctrines, and religion that you now hold. So what you really did was step out of them and join me as a person on the street. no loyalty to any religion, doctrine, or philosophy. Once you go out to the street and become just an ordinary person there, then you are free to inquire. You are free to go any direction that the evidence points to. Are you with me? So you've joined me now on the street. You are not a Hindu, you're not a Muslim, you're not a Buddhist, you're not a Christian, you're not a nobody. Just an ordinary person like me on the street, and from that point we're going to ask the questions that we started out already. We have the first question already. Is there a God or is there not a God in existence? And so let's get on with the question now. We are all inquirers. The great divide, that's what I called it. One side is A, God is non-existent, fictitious. B, God is relevant, factual. Why is the debate going on and on for century after century? I really don't know, but there could be a reason, and I think this is what it is, because of the way we structure the debate. And here is how we normally do it. We take sides first, and then pile up an argument upon an argument for us, for my side, and then point to the other side and knock down their arguments. So there are two columns of argument, mine and yours. But that's because we took a position beforehand. A person who is an inquirer doesn't take a position. He stands back and looks at both of them. And if you do both, then you will have to have 4 columns of argument. You take A and have an argument for A and an argument against A, pro and con. And then you take B and have an argument for B and an argument against B, pros and cons. And an inquirer, when he is faced with 2 options, has 4 lines of argument, whereas normally we just jump into it with 2. And when you have 2, you will not make much headway for the simple reason that there is enough of evidence for both of them, and there are enough of gaps to show that they are not relevant enough. Whereas if you do this, and I call it the pan process, pan meaning going across boundaries. Pan also stands for a process of sifting, trying to differentiate between common sand and the gold. Panning for gold? Yes. The third is Pan, my family name. Pandit, P-A-N, is the first 3 letters of my name. It is a pan process. And I did that for the simple reason that I was on an inquiry mode. It'll keep you there following the pan process. And here it is. Why do we do that? Because there are 2 clear-cut attitudes and claims. Look at this statement here and watch the word precisely. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's Richard Dawkins, the most vocal, he's a professor of biology from Oxford, one of the most vocal atheists today. The next sentence is from Patrick Glynn. The seemingly arbitrary and unrelated constants in physics have one strange thing in common. These are precisely, got the word? Precisely the values you need if you want to have a universe capable of producing life. There is no good reason for an intelligent person to embrace the illusion of atheism or agnosticism. Both are using the words precise, referring to facts and evidence, and yet reaching diametrically opposite views. So, we've got evidence obviously on both sides. We've got to do a good check on both sides. So we go to the arguments. The pan process has these 4. Arguments for A meaning there is no God in existence. And B meaning there is a God in existence. Let's get on with the arguments. Number 1, option A, God is non-existent. Arguments for that statement, none. Do you know why none? Because the statement is a negative statement. There is no God in existence. There isn't a God in existence. It is a negative statement, and a negative statement is valid only when you have exhausted all the possibilities. Let me give you an example. Suppose I have to state that there is nobody in this room by the name of John Smith. How many people should I be familiar with in the room? Everybody. And only after I've gone to every one of you and got your name can I make that statement. I usually give another example because a mighty big long name is the longest name in the United States. Suppose there are 10,000 lakes in the United States, and I say there is not a single lake by the name Chargogagog Manchaugagog Chaubanagan Gamaug. That's a real lake. That's a real name. It's in the Native American language. It's a lake up in Massachusetts. And the translation of that is, I fish on my side of the lake and you fish on your side of the lake and nobody fishes in between. Chargogagog Manchaugagog Chaubanagan Gamaug. Just suppose, I just throw it in for trivia. Just suppose we say there's no lake, none of the 10,000 lakes in the United States has that name. How many lakes should I be familiar with? Will 9,999 do? No. You must know all the 10,000 lakes, and only then will that negative statement be valid. Let's translate that concept to this idea of God. If we are going to say there is no God in existence, then well, let's first take the claim that there might be a God in existence. And if there is a God in existence, then there might be a location for him. He might be located somewhere. Are you familiar with every nook and corner of the state in which you live? Country? How about the world? Been to the moon? What if he has set up his office on the dark side of the moon? Been to the sun, 93 million miles away? Been to any of the other suns? Do you know how many other suns there are in our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy? 100 billion stars. Been to any of them? That's one galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. If we ask the astronomers, how do they guesstimate how many galaxies there are in the universe? Do you know how many there might be? What is the guesstimated number of galaxies in the universe? They look up, in one angle and then calculate the area there and then extrapolate it to the rest of the universe. 125 billion galaxies. Been to any of them? Even if you had gone to 99% of the galaxies, there would still be a billion galaxies still to go to. By what stretch of imagination can we now say there is nothing out there that I can call God? What if he is there, somewhere there? And therefore, we say that a statement in the negative cannot be valid until you have exhausted all the possibilities. Furthermore, if you and I can walk around, move, don't you think if there's a God, he also could move around? Just a simple logical question. If I can move, don't you think he can move? Of course he should be able to move if he gave me the ability. Well, then, if I go looking for him in Canada, he may have gone to India. And if I go looking up the North Pole, he may have found his way down here to Australia. So for me to say he is not anywhere, are you with me? For me to say that he is not anywhere, not only should I know and be familiar with every point, I should be at every point at the same time. Knowing every point is known as omniscience, and being at every point is known as omnipresence. These are the attributes we give to God. So for me to really stand up here and say there is no God in existence, I must have the attributes of God. It's a tangled knot. And there are no arguments in that column. Number 2 is arguments against B. B is the claim that there is a God in existence. And the arguments against that are these. I found 4. You will find many if you do your own search. I found these 4. Lack of empirical evidence. What's empirical evidence? Straightforward, direct evidence. Feeling, touching, hearing, tasting. Empirical evidence. Yes. I don't have empirical evidence for God's existence. I don't. So it could possibly be an argument. Because we don't see, don't hear, maybe he's not in existence. Yes, it's an argument. But it does not cover all of what we know. Because there are so many other things that I don't see or feel or taste, but I know it exists. Right? Like my mind, my own brain. I don't feel or taste it. My stomach, I don't. And yet, I know it exists. I don't know, I don't have any empirical evidence that water is H2O. But I still believe it, and hundreds of scientists believe it, and it works in science. So yes, empirical evidence is lacking, but lack of that empirical evidence is not a huge, big argument. It could be, but it's not big. Pain and suffering is a big one. There's so much of pain and suffering. So how can anybody say there's a God in existence? It is a tough one, and I will acknowledge it immediately. But on closer evaluation, the presence of pain and suffering is not an argument against the existence of God. It is an argument against the type of God we are claiming there to be, not the existence. Because the God that might be out there is a bad God then. Maybe he does cause pain and suffering, but he's a God anyway. So presence of pain and suffering is not an argument against God, but against the type of God or his attributes, not his existence. Number 2, pain and suffering are not the entire spectrum of our experiences on earth. We do experience pain and suffering, but we also experience exquisite joys and pleasures, don't we? All right, then let's be fair. If pain and suffering point to a situation in which there is no God, then what do those exquisite pleasures and joys point to? Yeah? It's a simple argument. And at best, they will cancel each other. So we still are not making a strong enough argument. The same thing with number 3, bad design and lack of design. Yes, there is randomness in some of the place experience that we face. You go out to a hillside. How are the rocks over there? In random manner. What are the trees in the jungle? In random manner. How can you explain a little child who got leukemia? Is there a real logical explanation why this little child got leukemia? You stand there nonplussed, deep in grief. There is no explanation. It seems random. Sure, there are places where there is no explanation at all. And yet, again, that is not the last or the only experience that we go through. There's not only just randomness in everything. There is so much of design in our world. And the design is just not ordinary. The design sometimes is so complex and precise that we are amazed. So if there is in one area randomness, no design, and that points to non-existence of God, then what do all this huge, beautiful, intricate, complex design point to? Again, they'll cancel each other. They don't stand. Number 4 is difficulty with the concept of creation. That's a tough one too. And because of 2 factors. It is not consistent with any observable phenomenon. I have never seen anyone snap his fingers and a whole mountain range just comes up as created. Have you? No. It is not an observable phenomenon. Number 2, it is not in conformity with any scientific law. I cannot appeal to a scientific law to say that that is how creation took place. So it is just a claim. And we have to leave it at that. Yes, it is difficult. But just because we can't explain that doesn't throw it out. It just says that we are deficient in being able to explain it. These 2 points are pretty strong, showing that there is more that we need to establish that statement in fact or in evidence, and therefore we do rest on what is known as belief or faith. Granted that. So we have our arguments on that side. Argument on one column, argument on two. Let's get on to the other side now, to arguments 3 and 4. The option is now B. God does exist, and what are the pros and cons there? Circumstantial, anthropic, and logical analysis, and what else you see on the board. Let's go to circumstantial. Billions believe in God. If there's only one person who tells me that he or she saw a little cow with the heads on both sides of the body, I'll say, yeah, give me another one. But if 10 people say, no, we did see a little cow with 2 heads, one on this side and one on the other side, I'll say, yes. If 200 people tell me that they did see it, then I'll start scratching my head and saying, I wonder. If 10,000 people tell me that they did see it, then I believe in all honesty, I should shift my mind from disbelief to at least there being a possibility. That is the meaning of circumstantial evidence. It is not a proof. It just shows that there is a possibility. It's not 10,000. It's billions who believe in God, who are willing to say, I know from inside that there is a God in existence. So I must not stand and say, whoosh, and wipe it off. The correct, honest way would be to say, is that a big number? Then, well, I wonder if it's possible. And that's it. Number 2, it's very deep in human psyche, in the human mind. Our history of the human race that we can go back to reaches about 5,000 years. And in all these 5,000 years, written, or at least claimed to be written, there has never been even one generation on this earth in our entire history where the idea of the supernatural has been wiped off. Never, not even one single generation. It is so deep, and if something lasts for 10 years, we must give it some credibility, don't you think? If that same idea lasts for a century, then there is a certain credibility that is inherent right there. If it lasts for thousands of years in billions of people's minds, then I believe the correct way to look at it is there's a possibility. Number 3 is the presence of design. Like we said just a moment ago, it is not design that is bitty and small. It is precise. It is complex. It is huge. And right here I might appeal to another science, the science of archaeology. Have you ever heard of an archaeologist who very carefully goes to his dig and brushes off the dust from a little ornate pillar, for instance, with nice markings there? And he says this is a prize find in his dig, and he brings it to his table and puts it there, stands back, and it said happened by itself. Never. From a broken piece of pottery, an archaeologist looking at those markings and the color and whatever else he wants to look at will tell you when it was made, which country, possibly the language the person spoke, his social status, maybe his financial status too. Why do we give him that credibility? Because of the very simple, logical, stepwise approach that anything that is a design requires the explanation of having a designer somewhere along the way. If you see a design, there must be a designer. And that is why he will brush off the dirt, but keep this pillar. The dirt obviously does not have a design. He is not interested in that. The pillar has a design. And so when he looks at a design, he starts working on the idea of who the designer is. And that is why we have so much of historical evidence of our past. Because you see any design, it calls for a designer. And the characteristics of the designer. The fact is really, he threw off the dirt. And what if I tell you, or what if I tell the archaeologist, if you look carefully into dirt and look at the molecules that form the dirt, there is a precise design in the dirt itself. Then shouldn't the archaeologist go looking for the designer of that as well? Yes, of course. Any design, if you did it at that place, why do you not do it in this place too? So to be consistent, any design, your first bet shouldn't be that it happened by itself. You must look for the designer. And the design, right, is anything but small. If there's a broken vase, can you look just at the jagged edge and say there's no design here? A broken vase is still a vase. Why? Because despite the broken edge, you see design in the rest of it. In other words, if any phenomenon, if any place has design and non-design within it, then the design takes precedence. And you do look for a designer. But these are all only circumstantial evidences. We go to Anthropic Principle. This word anthropos means human. It was coined by Brandon Carter, a British physicist. And it talks about those factors that allow humans or life to exist on any planet. Factors that contribute to and sustain human life on a planet. We're going to look at two of them, maintenance of life and conditions for research. Maintenance of life. The expansion rate. Do you know that our universe is expanding? And it is expanding at a certain rate. If it goes a little slower or a little faster, life would be impossible. And look what the number is. Take the expansion rate of the universe, which is fine-tuned to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. That is, if it were changed by 1 part in either direction, a little faster, a little slower, we could not have a universe that would be capable of supporting life. Just the expansion rate. Gravity. It's incomprehensibly narrow range. The strongest nuclear force in nature is called the strong nuclear force, which holds protons and the neutrons together in the center of an atom. That is the strongest force that we know in nature. The weakest force that we know in nature is gravity. Even a little ant will lift a leaf against gravity. It's the weakest force in nature. Now suppose you draw a line and put millimeter marks on the line and draw the line out from here around the world and go off to the moon and onto the sun 93 million miles away and go clean across our galaxy and swing this line out to the 10,000th galaxy. Now it's gone past our minds. Millimeter marks on this line. Then the scale of the power that's in the universe, the spectrum is, if the strong nuclear force is way out on the 10,000th galaxy, gravity is on millimeter number 1. That's the spectrum. Now what will happen if you shift gravity to millimeter 2 on that line that goes from here to the 10,000th galaxy? All you're going to shift it is from 1 millimeter to 2. Do you know what will happen? Our Earth, which is 7,000 miles in diameter, will shrink to a globe that is only 40 miles in diameter. All life will cease. If you just shift gravity to the 2nd millimeter mark, and that is why they say that gravity has an incomprehensibly narrow range for life to exist. If The fine-tuning of this statement, I didn't put it up there, but this is called the cosmological constant. Don't worry about these big names. The cosmological constant is just the density of matter in space, the whole of space. The density of matter has to be a very correct amount. If it is too much, all matter will collapse, all galaxies will collapse. If it is too little, they'll all fly apart. It has to be very fine-tuned to a billion, 100 million, billion. That's the number. So in other words, it moves one mark away, gone. Who is controlling all of that? When you combine the two, gravity and cosmological constant, the fine-tuning would be to precision of 1 part in 100 million, trillion. That would be the equivalent of one atom in the entire known universe. Take all the atoms. Look, in my body itself, I'm not a big guy. I have about 75 trillion cells. 75 trillion cells, not atoms, cells. So you line up all these cells and then break them up into atoms and line all the atoms, yours, mine, the trees, the mountains, the seas, this earth, moon, planets, everything, 125 billion galaxies. And if the needle was supposed to be on atom number 510, that's where it is. It is not on 509, it's not on 511. Fine-tuned, absolutely fine-tuned. How about a situation? Now it's not a place like, front row, and I don't want to sit in the front row here, I want to sit in the side here. No, it's a position in the galaxy. Our position in the galaxy. We happen to be situated safely between the Sagittarius and Perseus spiral arms. I cannot come up with an example of another place in the galaxy that is as friendly to life as our location. Any other place will have too much of radiation, for instance, and we would cease to exist. It's only in the very inner edge of the circumstellar habitable zone, that is, the distance from the sun, in which we have low enough carbon dioxide and high enough oxygen to sustain complex animal life and human life like yours and mine, and that's where we are. Who put us there? Over the past 30 years or so, scientists have discovered that just about everything about the basic structure of the universe is balanced on a razor's edge for life to exist. Conditions for research. Do you know that this earth is, according to what we can observe in the universe, the only place in the universe where you can see and experience a total solar eclipse? The moon is 232,000 miles away from us, and it occupies an area in the sky that much. The sun is 400 times the mass of the moon, and it is exactly 400 times away. And so it also occupies the exact same area in the sky. And that is why we can have a total solar eclipse, because they occupy the exact same area in the atmosphere. So what's so great about a total solar eclipse? Well, scientists tell us that it is the only phenomenon during which they can study the color spectrum of our sun. A certain color spectrum is available only during a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse. And because of that, we can extrapolate and study other stars. So, conditions for research. Not only that, Einstein's theory of relativity is a theory and a mathematical calculation and a formula that relates to all existence of the whole universe. This is the existence of matter in a total solar eclipse. That is the only phenomenon where you can observe one part of Einstein's theory of relativity, which says gravity can bend light. Can you imagine that? This earth is the only place where you can have an observable part of Einstein's theory of relativity. Nowhere else. In every other place in the universe, it will be a theory. Here, we can observe it because there is a total solar eclipse going on. And why? Because these bodies are exactly positioned in the distance they are and the size they are. Amazing? Amazing? Wow? No? It's that incredible coincidence that creates a perfect match. How about our location? Our location away from the galaxy center in the flat plane of the disk provides us with a particularly privileged vantage point for observing both nearby and distant stars. The very composition of our atmosphere gives it transparency. If not, we wouldn't have been able to observe anything outside our Earth. It is this, that we find a universe where the very places where we find observers are also the very best over places for observing. That is surprising. I see design in this pattern of habitability, meaning the factors that allow us to live, and measurability, the factors that allow us to do scientific measurements. So not only are these factors allowing us to be alive, these factors are the only place that allow us to do any scientific observation as we know in any other part of the universe. Amazing. Logical analysis. Logic requires some facts to which you put reasoning. And I appeal now to an argument which is very old. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. It was enunciated way back then. 3 steps, very simple. Whatever begins has to have a cause. This universe had a beginning. The universe then has to have a cause. It is so simple and yet so profound. I took that and made it into my PAN process and decided to take another little factor somewhat similar, but here's how it goes. Science also has a philosophy. It's kind of an oxymoron, but it does have a philosophy. Science doesn't mean only knowledge. Science doesn't mean only a method of inquiry. It is also a philosophy. And here's the philosophy of science. It's called materialism or naturalism. And that says that all that there is in existence are these 4. Matter, energy, time, and space. And they are governed by physical laws. There is nothing beyond this. There is nothing supernatural. That is the philosophy of science today. So we take that, everybody agrees to that, that's their philosophy, that is the claim. If that's the claim, that means all matter, that is all material, that is all matter, energy, space, time, had a beginning. And we call the beginning the Big Bang. Do you know what banged? People think it's a globe. No. It's a point so small that has no dimensions, where the entire energy of the universe was locked up. Because matter and energy are interchangeable. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, matter and energy are interchangeable. Once upon a time there was no matter, there was only energy, and energy does not occupy space. So all the energy of the entire universe was locked up in that one bitty little point with no dimensions. And that is what exploded. Boom! 125 billion galaxies from there. But it had a beginning. Now, the cause of an end product, like this pointer. It is quite unreasonable for me to say that the pointer is the cause of the pointer, right? If I looked at a table, wooden table, nobody ever says that the table is the cause of the table. Nobody even ever says that wood is the cause of that table. You could say that the carpenter was the cause of the table. But the moment you say that, the carpenter is distinct from the wood and the table. In other words, the cause of a product is always transcendent or distinct or lies outside of that. Always. And that is the logic that we are using here. So now we go back to all matter. All material then consists of matter, energy, time, and space. Therefore, the cause of energy, matter, time, and space cannot be found within energy, matter, time, and space. The cause is distinct. It lies outside. In other words, it is distinct from it. It has to be then supernatural. There are two factors that come in, two characteristics that we see about this cause then. Number one, matter is very complex, very intricate, very precise. And therefore, the cause of that kind of a matter would have to have some kind of intellect to make it so precise. In other words, a giant intellect. And this is what Einstein talked about when he said, when he looked at the universe, that he was in rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. So it is a giant intellect. If you think of the power that there is, energy, how much energy is there in the universe? Huge amount. Then the cause of that energy should be able to supply that energy, supply the energy to those mighty clusters of galaxies there, as well as have a sufficient control of that energy to control the smallest subatomic particle inside an atom. That is the concept we see, because this is an observation, this is not an opinion. It's an observation that matter is very precise and complex, and energy is massive. So, brilliant intellect, awesome power. Could this be God? I'll quickly address just two of the questions. There are a bunch of them. We will do them tomorrow, as many as we can. Number one is, how do we know that Earth is the only place where we can observe a total solar eclipse? I do not know. I can only state what evidence we have. And in looking out, astronomers tell us that there is no other place where this combination exists. So if they are wrong, well, I don't know. But they tell us that there is no other place where a planet has a moon or a satellite and a star that is at that distance and at those sizes. They could be wrong, but that's what they tell me. Now, the other way to answer that, for you, whoever asked, and for all of us, is to say, well, I don't think so. I don't think. And therefore, I would like to propose that there is another place. And then give me the evidence for the other place. Is that fair enough? Yeah. Because if you want to make, like I would like to state, that you can easily poke holes in people's arguments. But it is good as an enquirer to have two propositions. Then you can have 4 lines of argument. So if you say this is not possibly what it is, then tell me what is, and then we'll look at both. That's the balanced way of looking at it. The other is, or the other question, who designed the designer? Excellent question, actually, because we're looking at logic, right? Who designed the designer then? Logical, good question. But remember, logic must be placed on some pieces of information. You need 2 things if you want to make a conclusion that's a good logical conclusion. You need some pieces of information on which you use logic. If the pieces of information is faulty, then no matter how good the logic, your conclusion will not stand. If your pieces of information is good, but you use faulty logic, you will still end up with a wrong conclusion. In this case, to ask who designed the designer, we must go to the pieces of information, not the logic, because the logic is good. Who designed the designer? Because we told ourselves that when you see something that has a design, you must look for the designer. So who designed God? The fault is not in the logic, the fault is in the claims that are being made. And when you have a claim, you must not change the claims. You must shoot it down by a good argument, but not change the claims. The claim of God is that He is not, He, she, it is not created, timeless, beginningless, without end, without beginning. That is the claim. Now you got to shoot the claim down, but not change the claim. So the claim is that this creator was not created. That's the claim. So if you say, no, the creator was created, okay, then let's put it on one column and put the other one on the other column and have your arguments for and against either of those. Is that fair enough? Yeah. If you say that the creator, this designer was designed, then show me some evidence for that. Because you're making a claim. I'll leave that with you. Because it's a good way of doing a PAN process. Go ahead. And that's your search. And that is the way you look at it. But I would suggest, do not change the claim. That will not be fair, because if you do that, then you can win all the arguments on earth. You can just change the argument there and then shoot it down from here. That is not being reasonable. Don't change the claim. You have arguments for and against the claim, but don't change it. That's my response. It's not an answer, it's a response. Here we go. Formation of granite. Now, if the background to this is the idea that if there is no God in existence, then the processes that formed what we now know as the earth took millions and hundreds of millions of years. If there was a God, then there is a possibility that the God could do what is known as creation and snap his fingers and it'll happen, boom, just right there. The formation of granite. We know how sedimentary rocks are formed, layer upon layer of sand, and then over a period of time they get compressed and form rock. We know how igneous rock is formed. It's lava that becomes rock later on. We do not know how granite is formed. There's only a theory. And in that theory, the material which was gaseous in stage coalesced or got together, and under a certain pressure and temperature became granite. But that is a theory. Granite has never ever been formed by those pressures and temperatures and material. Never. But here's what we have so far. There is something known as polonium halos. Now what's polonium? Polonium-218 is a radioisotope. What's a radioisotope? A material that gives off radiation. And any material that gives off radiation decays or becomes smaller in quantity itself. It'll give off the radiation and then become smaller. So when you look at the mass of some radioactive substance, we talk about half-lives. In other words, how much time does it take to become half its size? Uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.53 billion years. So if there's a bitty little piece of uranium here, it'll take 4.53 billion years for that material to become half its size. Polonium-218 is what is known as a primordial radioisotope. In other words, there is no material from which it came. Most of the others, when it decays or becomes or gives off its radiation, becomes something else, like uranium, then becomes radon, radium, and then finally it goes on to lead. Lead stops because it's not a radioactive isotope. Polonium-218 is a radioisotope that is primordial. It doesn't have a previous precursor or something that it came from. Polonium-218 has a half-life of 3 minutes. So it stays for 3 minutes and half-life and becomes half. If you pull it to its full life, it's about 5 hours. People talk about half-lives as the life. So we'll leave it at 3 minutes, but you can use 5 hours too. It has a half-life of 5 hours. Now, suppose there's a bubble that is caught in a block of ice. the bubble lasts for only 5 hours. How long do you think then that we should say it took for the ice to form? At least 5 hours, not more than that. If it took more than that, the bubble is gone. Are you with me? I'll say that again. If a bubble is going to last for only 5 hours and then it's gone, and we do find a bubble in a block of ice, then we can reasonably deduce that that ice caught the bubble in a period of 5 hours. Because if it took longer than that, the bubble is gone. Polonium-218 has a half-life of 3 minutes to 5 hours, a full life of 5 hours. When it decays, it gives off radiation. And when it's in a substance, the radiation causes what is known as a signature halo. It forms a halo around in the substance itself as it gives off the radiation. So if a material has caught a halo, then the material was formed between 3 minutes and 5 hours. Is that reasonable? Yes, that's what the reasoning is. Polonium halos, an exceedingly large number of polonium halos are embedded in granites around the world, including in Yosemite, where I've gone to those huge, gigantic granite rocks. Every granite rock that they have tested around the world has polonium halos embedded in huge quantities. It's an astounding conclusion. Granite was formed not in hundreds of millions of years, but within 3 minutes to 5 hours. Yeah, you've got to say, wow. I met the author who really did this research himself a few months ago in Maryland, USA. And I went up to him and I said, has anybody refuted what you have published as in scientific journals? And this is what he said. We have repeatedly challenged the Academy to publicly explain whether polonium halo evidence for creation has ever been scientifically invalidated. For over 15 years, they have refused to even try. It's quite an amazing piece of information from the scientific world. And it's been there for 15 years now. And I asked him, has anyone refuted? He said, not to this day. Till that time, I think scientifically, if you're a scientist, and if I'm a scientist, searching for knowledge, an inquirer is a scientist, then we have to agree, or at least give some credence to it and say, it is possible that granite, and granite is supposed to be the framework of planet Earth. The frame of planet Earth was formed within 3 minutes to 5 hours. Statistical analysis. Chance is a subjective concept, but it is also a mathematical formula. It is called probability. What are the chances that this will happen? Okay, you put all the factors into the formula, and then the formula churns out a number, and it's 1 to so and so. In day-to-day life, 10 to the power of 8, which is 100 million, if something is going to occur 100 million times, and it probably will not occur only once, then in day-to-day life we say it's a fact. It will, if it occurs only once, and will not occur 10 to the power of 8 times, that is 100 million times, then we say it's not possible. This is day-to-day life. When it comes to scientific evaluation, the number goes up to 10 to the power of 15 or 1 quadrillion. If you want to build a drawbridge or shoot a rocket into space carrying people, or make a roller coaster, then the principles that you use for building those things have to go to a point of 10 to the power of 15. In other words, the principle must sustain itself 10 to the power of 15 times and chances, and be probably not there one chance, and only then they will use that principle, because life is at stake. So 10 to the power of 15 is the point at which they say this is a good scientific plan or a good scientific concept. When it comes to scientific law, the number goes up to 10 to the power 50. 10, 1 followed by 50 zeros. So if something is going to occur 10 to the power of 50 times and will not occur only one time, then we say it is a law, scientific law. And if it occurs only once, only one chance, and it will not occur 10 to the power of 50 times, we say it is utterly impossible. It's a scientific law that it will not occur. Michael Denton was one of the first, arguably, one of the first to challenge Charles Darwin's theory based on statistical chance. What he did was looked at the first cell that probably occurred and came together and asked, what are the chances that some components of the cell came together to the same place by themselves? Because that's the claim. It's spontaneous generation, they call it. By themselves, the material came together. Now, we want the cell to live. So we look at what is the minimum number of proteins that require a cell to live, and that is 100. What are the chances that they came together? Before that, this number 1, 10 to the power of 50 actually flies over our heads. So let me give you one idea of where we are with that number. Suppose I want to test gravity with my pointer. Once a second, I am dropping this, hoping that I'll get to that one chance when the pointer will not fall down like that because of gravity, but will stay right there or float away. I'm looking for that chance. So once per second, I'm testing gravity. If we test it 10 to the power of 18 times, not 10 to the power of 50, 10 to the power of 18 times, it will take me 15 billion years. To test it 10 to the power of 20 times, it will take me 1.5 trillion years. What is the significance of the first one, 10 to the power of 18 seconds, 15 billion years? That is the age of the universe, from the Big Bang. The entire age of the universe is only 10 to the power of 18 seconds. 10 to the power of 18 times. I still got to go to 10 to the power of 50. 10 to the power of 20 is 100 times the age of the universe. All we are trying to portray here is 10 to the power of 50 is a humongous number. It is arbitrary, but you cannot question it because it is so big. Are you with me? All right, 10 to the power of 50 is a big number. So big you cannot question it. And that is why it is a law, a scientific law. Now, when Michael Denton looked at those, he realized that, and did his studies, it requires 100 proteins to inside one cell to keep it alive. So what are the chances that 100 proteins came together by themselves? It would give a maximum combined probability of 10 to the power of minus 2000, or one chance in 10 to the power of 2000. There's another guy who looked at just not the proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Those are building blocks. So the 100 proteins will require 10,000 amino acids. And peculiarly, the amino acids have right-sided links or left-sided links. In scientific terms, they are called levo or dextro, left-sided or right-sided links. In nature, we find what is known as racemic mixtures of amino acids. Racemic mixtures means there is equal part of right-handed and left-handed. And no known process, we know of no known process by which we can change that ratio. And yet inside the cell, all the 10,000 amino acids are only left-handed. Same thing with nucleotides, which are the building blocks for the chromosomes inside the nucleus. We need 100,000 nucleotides, and inside the cell, all 100,000 nucleotides have to be only right-handed nucleotides. Otherwise, they won't even link together. What are the chances that these things can come together at the same place, same time, at a spot that is about 2,500 times smaller than the dot at the end of a sentence in a book? The chances are 10 to the power of 33,113. There was Harold Morowitz. He said, let's look at the whole cell, not just the nucleotides, the nuclear membrane, the cytoplasm, the nucleus, the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, everything that you can possibly think of. And let us ask ourselves mathematically, what are the chances that one cell, just the material in the one cell could come together? This is his number, 10 to the power of 100 billion. And this is just to bring the material together. Now that material that has come together must somehow become alive. That is not in these chances. And every molecule in that cell must know what to do. And then that cell must know exactly how to divide so that when it becomes two cells, both the cells are exactly like the parent cell and both are alive. And then those two have to become more complex, 100 cells and 1,000,000 cells, and then you get plant life and then animal life and finally humans like you and me. And then somehow into that complex organism must be injected abstract qualities like love and courage and appreciation for beauty. Are you with me? That list itself is endless. If the list is endless, what are the chances? Statistically, an utter, complete impossibility. So by numbers, the statistical analysis says that the event was much better explained as a supervised event rather than as a random event that occurred by itself. The universe is unlikely, very unlikely, deeply, shockingly unlikely. That's from Discover. So what caused it? What did they say? So if it is so unlikely, how did it happen? Here's a book called A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. It's read all over the world, and this is their explanation. So what caused the whole universe? To begin with, some quality or thing, we don't know which one it is, quality or thing, that introduced a measure of instability into the nothingness that was. To me, that's not a scientific explanation. First of all, you do not know whether it's a quality or thing. You're just guessing then. Secondly, how can you say there was a quality or thing because there was nothing? Yes. It is a very difficult proposition to sustain an argument there. And how did life start then? It was a singularly hostile environment, and yet somehow life got going. Somehow. It's a scientific explanation. Somehow life got going. Some tiny bag of chemicals twitched and became animate. We were on our way. These are in layman's terms. But no matter what the scientific terms are, the basic explanation are only these. There is no other explanation. You have to say, somehow, I don't know how, but it happened. But I don't want to ever say that there was a creator. It happened by itself. The difficulties of belief may be great. The absurdities of unbelief are greater. Because you cannot find an explanation while pretending or stating that you have an explanation. Because science requires that, an explanation. And so if you give a whole big explanation and finally say, I don't have an explanation, it really is not scientific. And it's absurd for the simple reason that if it is so unlikely, like we saw the discover statement, is so unlikely, then we can almost call it magic. So here is the proposition. The persons who believe that it is a supervised event will tell you that the magic occurred because a magician performed it. And the people on the other side will say, how naive. How can you ever think of that? Magic? By a magician? Come over to my side. My side is magic without even the magician. It becomes absurd. It does. So why do they want to run away or move away from that? Why would you not want to go there? I really don't know, but there are some statements that they have said. Why should God rule and I serve? I don't want there to be a God who would hold me responsible for my immoral lifestyle. That's Lee Strobel as an atheist. For a fruitful public debate, we need to understand evolution's foundation. We need to understand this because ultimately evolution is not about scientific details. Ultimately evolution is about God. This is a very big statement. And it can be challenged. And I would like you to challenge it and go ahead and see if that statement makes any sense. Because if it is scientific evaluation and scientific details, then I think the first thing we must stand up and say, well, statistically it's impossible. Number one. Spontaneous generation, this is George Wald. I think he was a Nobel laureate, Nobel Prize winning scientist. Way back in 1954, this is what he said. Spontaneous generation, meaning by itself, was disproved 100 years ago, but that leads us to only one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. We cannot accept that on scientific grounds? No, we cannot accept that on philosophical grounds. And therefore we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. It is a choice, and everybody is free to make their choice. And that we agree, and we accept, and we give way to. You're free to choose, but you're not free to say that it is scientifically based, because it is not scientifically based. The correct scientific basis would say there is a chance that it is a supervised event. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. That's a philosophical statement. But it's not scientific. It has to be a philosophical statement. So, the conclusion, origin of life by random chance is utterly impossible statistically. The only alternative is supernatural creation by design. There is intelligent design all around us. There must be a creator in existence. This creator should be called God. You don't have to call God, because I remember describing this in front of a university group, and they said, why do you want to call God? I don't like that word. I said, fine. And I think it should be fine if you don't want to use the word God. So I said, well, what would you like to use word? Which word would you like to use? And he said, didn't think about that, but let me see. Why don't we call that a leaf or a twig? I said, that's fine, as long as you remember that the leaf and the twig knows more than you. Because that is the characteristics we have. You don't change the characteristics, you can change the name. Give any name you want. So I will throw that out to you too. Give any name you want. If I call him God, don't fight with me. And you want to call that leaf or a twig, go ahead. But the characteristics are awesome power, giant intellect. That's what we saw. Pan process of the 4 columns, that is how I did that initial part of my search. You don't have to take it. Do your own. But make all 4 columns and see how it pans out for you. For me, obviously, the swing of the pendulum was decisively to the side, that if I was to use reason, information, and logic, I would have to agree that there was something known as a supernatural beyond what we see. Now those numbers, just a little bit of statistics on those, or the response or the consideration of those numbers. Once you reach a place of, 1 is to 10 to the power of 100 billion, then we are talking about impossible versus possible. So here's the logic. If there are two options, only two, and one of them is right, which in this case has to be, there is a God, there is no God, the only two options, then if A is possible, so is B. If A becomes improbable, B becomes probable. If A becomes impossible, B becomes fact. Say that again. If there are only two possibilities, only one of which is right, then if A is possible, so is B. If A becomes improbable, B becomes probable. If A becomes impossible, B becomes fact. I'll give you a real life example. We'll do a math test here. Square root. Is the square root of a number bigger or smaller than the number? Maths. The square root is always smaller. The square root of 9 is 3. 3 squared is 9. All right? So here's the test. I'm going to throw out a test. Don't answer until I ask you. What is the square root of 25? Don't answer. There are only two options I am going to give you. Only one of them is correct. You got it? I'm asking for what is the square root of 25. And I'm going to give you two options, and only two, and only one of them is correct. A is 33. B, I'm not even going to tell you. Which would you choose? B. Yes. Why? You didn't see it. I didn't even write it down for you. Why would you choose B? Because A is impossible. The square root of a number can never be bigger than the number. So the square root of 25 cannot be 33. You don't even have to see B and visualize it even to choose B. As long as A is impossible, B is fact. With me? When statistically the chances are 1 is to 10 to the power of 100 billion, then that becomes impossible, because 1 is to 10 to the power of 50 itself is impossible by scientific law. Then if that is impossible, the other option becomes fact. You don't even have to see it. So we analyze this as closely as possible. And like I said, for me it was clear that the pendulum was swinging to one side. I had no option but to accept there was something beyond our existence that possibly had a tremendous intellect and also tremendous power. We're going to close in just a few minutes. I'm just going to welcome you to the search part, in which we went off from the idea of God now to what is truth and all that stuff. I'll just throw out the question that set me off, and here's the question. Is your religion true because you believe it, or do you believe your religion because it's true? When I heard that, I thought it was kind of a party riddle kind of a thing, One slick answer and whew, it's gone. But the more I thought about it, the more it gripped me. And I wrote down some ramifications of those points. If your religion is true because you believe it, we will call it a belief-based. And your religion is Believe your religion because it is true. It is truth or evidence-based. So there are two concepts here. A belief-based, that means I believe it, and so it is. And the other ones, there is some evidence, and therefore I believe it. Is your religion true because you believe it? Is belief-based, and the other one is truth-based. I'm going to just show you just a few ramifications of these 2 points, and we'll close for this evening. If it is belief-based, then every religion or every statement on earth has to be accepted as true as long as somebody believes it. Because it's belief-based. It's based on a belief. So if somebody says so-and-so is the Prime Minister of Australia, you must say yes. And if somebody else says, no, I believe so-and-so is the Prime Minister, you must say yes, that also is true. As long as somebody believes it. The bird that flew by, well, it's a crow, black. No, I think it is white, it's a pigeon. Well, both are right, because you believe it. You've got to accept that something can be diametrically opposite, and you have to accept it if it's belief-based. Number two, your God is the product of your belief. If you believe your God is big and strong, then He is big and strong. If you believe He's bitty and little, then well, He's bitty and little. If it is belief-based. And belief is what creates truth. In other words, you believe it, and so it is. The question there would be, would you be deeply satisfied, not when you're sitting here, but when you're facing those big tidal wave problems that come to every human on earth? When you are faced with those, most of us would like to go to a source that is bigger than ourselves. We go to our parents, we go to a professor, we go to somebody who has a little more knowledge than us. It is not satisfying to go to a source that we ourselves created because of our belief. If it is truth-based or evidence-based, then every religion is not true. There are merits and there are demerits, and you can weigh them out. God has His own attributes. You can look for them, you can search for them. You can't give Him any attributes because of your belief. You got to look for what is there. You got to look for the evidence, and that is what will create belief. It is truth that creates belief. And the big question really is this: what is the basis of saying your religion is true? Those 20 years when I went around talking, 95 to 99% cannot answer that question, nor could I. When I asked the Muslim, what is the basis of your strong belief? Well, the Quran says so. Well, if that's the case, then what about the Hindu who says he is strongly believing in his religion because the Bhagavad Gita says so? We have not gone anywhere. You ask the Christian, why do you continue to be a Christian? Well, you believe in Jesus? Yes. Why? He said He is the way and the truth and the life. Oh, yeah? Well, Gautama Buddha said he was super enlightened. Now what? So you see, when we just make a claim, it is difficult. And I tried to answer that question one day at home. Is my religion truth-based or evidence-based or just belief-based? And I went home. Nobody was at home that day. And I wanted to be alone. And I said, let's put this to a test as a court of law. I was going to be the judge, the jury, the defendant, the defense counsel, and the prosecuting attorney, all in one. And I began the session. Boom. In 10 minutes, the jury and the public was laughing at the defense counsel. And I fell flat on my face. And I said, it won't do. It won't do. I cannot sustain my own arguments, and I went on that 20-year search. We're going to look at the rest of it tomorrow night. So please come back at 7 o'clock or before 7 so we can start at 7. And so for now, good night. We'll see you again.